All right, so this is an update to stuff I've been doing on that. So one of the things I've done is got the foot pegs, got the pugs, and these are going to be on here for a little while. I've actually ordered a set of proper adjustable rear sets. I'm going to play around with those, and if I like them, I'll keep those on here and get them all adjusted. It's all machined aluminum billet and stuff like that. And then these pugs, I'll just put over there, transfer those over to the ZX6R. So the update is on the tires, because I got the first proper ride going up in the mountains today, and also the chain sprocket update from the last video. And I'm going to make a recommendation here on this bike, and this recommendation is going to go contrary to what I find most people that have this bike seem to think. And it's okay, I don't have a problem going against the grain, as they say. But I also think there's a reason why I go against the grain on this. Part of it's just my nature. I'm blunt. Some are going to say, well, that makes you a dick. Whatever. We all have our personality quirks. But honestly, most people are saying, and where I've gotten into most of the arguments with people on this bike, and I think it has to do with the demographic, the people who tend to buy this bike. Now, I'm going to preface this before I get anyone's nose out of joint. When I talk about this, it's not a hard and fast rule. It's a generalization. It generally applies, because invariably there's going to be someone that says, well, I have this bike and I'm not in that. I get that. It doesn't apply to everybody. It just applies to the majority. And I've had a theory on this, as well as some of the other guys from the Z900 forum. And so I did a poll and had over 220 respondents, so a pretty good sampling. And I asked, what kind of rider are you? The person that owns this bike, what kind of rider are you? Are you a sport bike rider that rides current sport bikes? Are you a vintage guy? Are you a new rider? Are you a road sport bikes, but then you wanted something more comfortable? Are you a cruiser guy that wanted something more? So I worded it a bunch of different ways, knowing that they were going to actually be combined. And so what I found was barely 25% of the 220 respondents considered themselves sport bike riders. Most of them were new riders, cruiser guys wanting something a little sportier, guys that were older, liked vintage bikes, or guys that were older riders, maybe boomers, that wanted something that kind of harkened back to their teenage years, their glory days kind of thing. Of the 25% that identified themselves as sport bike riders, we broke it down into a separate poll, and only 10% of them were current sport bike riders that rode sport bikes, that do track days and things like that, faster riders. 90% of that 25% were guys that were former sport bike riders that wanted to slow down, get comfortable. They were getting on in years and decided to kind of hang up the sport bike thing and go this route. Why is this relevant? Why am I even talking about this? Because the discussions I've had that kind of turned into debates and created a little bit of animosity with some folks about this bike, and it ties into the gearing and stuff. I've made the point in the past that Kawasaki designed this bike primarily for new riders and hipsters and boomers. And that was who they figured this would appeal to. The newer riders that are kind of into the vintage thing. The hipsters are very into cafe racers and vintage bikes and things like that. So you can have a vintage cafe racer style bike without the hassle of actually owning, an actual vintage bike. And then you've got a lot of, boomers where this was the bike they had when they were a teenager or a first rider, or their dad had that kind of bike and they always dreamed about it. And they're done doing sport bikes for the most part, and they wanted something. So when I get into these discussions with folks about gearing, everyone else wants to gear this bike up. They think, oh, it's not smooth, it needs smoothing out, and they're basically gearing it up, which reduces top speed because it doesn't have the muscle to push it through the wind at that speed, but also takes away from acceleration. And other folks that are saying, oh no, the bike has a lot of power and 6 gear isn't too tall. Everything from that to your normal motorcycle myths like, oh yeah, you shouldn't use synthetic oil braking in a motor because it's too slippery and the rings won't seat properly. which is something that came from the 1970s, because people were taking car oil, which contains moly and other friction modifiers, and they're putting in their bike, which has a wet clutch. The friction modifiers would mess with the wet clutch and start it slipping. So their conclusion was synthetic oil is too slippery. And if it's too slippery, could that cause problems with braking and other things? Well, it's not the synthetic was too slippery. Synthetic's not more slippery than dyno oil, if you're talking about comparable quality oils. And motorcycle oil doesn't contain friction modifiers like molybdenum. So that was the problem. They just said, oh, it must be the synthetic part, not the car additives, because cars don't share oil with the transmission in a wet clutch environment. So I can tell the age of the person I'm talking to, we get into these discussions with, because it's usually going to be someone who they know what they know, and that's what they knew in the 1970s, and they haven't updated their material since, even though it's been debunked 500 times. So gearing was the other thing, and it seems to be new riders who maybe came off a Ninja 300 or something smaller, and so this is a big step up in performance. Or guys that are into the vintage bikes, or they're older riders and stuff like that. So my advice is going the opposite direction. Most people are saying, oh, go the 16-tooth sprocket, smooth it out. If you buy a bike because you want kind of a bad boy bike, you want something that's a little bit of a hooligan and it's fast and a little bit brutish and has fun, it feels like the king of the road, which it was back in the day. Gearing it up takes away from that. The bike is geared from the factory to do 167 miles an hour. It can't physically do that because it doesn't have the horsepower. You'd have to add another 40, 50 horsepower to get it to do that. So it can't actually do that, but that's what it's geared to do. My philosophy is, knowing that this is a 135 mile an hour bike, and maybe if you're a small rider and a light tuck with a slight tailwind, you might hit 140. Why have it geared to do nearly 170? When you do the 16-tooth front sprocket, you're now gearing it to do 180. There was a guy that wanted to do a 17-tooth. He wanted to go up 2 teeth in the front. He's gearing his bike to do 189 or 190 on a 130 mile an hour bike. I don't understand that. If you want this to feel like a sport bike, if you want it to be a little bit like a hooligan and be that king of the road, that was the sport bike, that was the super bike, the kind of the king of the hill back in its day. Don't do it by neutering it and gearing it for better fuel economy. If you want fuel economy, buy a Prius, or don't buy a motorcycle. You know what I mean? This should be something that's fun. If you're using it for a commuter, all right, well, maybe. But if you're a person who actually, likes to ride fast and likes to, is a sport bike rider, you're not going to want to listen to the advice on the forums and go with the 16 or 17 tooth front. Leave the front 15, go up 1, 2, 3 teeth in the back. Wouldn't go up more than 3, because it is going to get buzzy on the highway if you do. But gear it down, get more power. The other thing is, we'll show some video. We had a good shakedown of these, these Pilot Powers, and they stuck pretty well. I mean, I got them to the edge on that. It wasn't really trying hard because it's warm today, but it's not really warm. It's only like 68 degrees. But they seemed to stick pretty well. Turned in nice. Didn't feel anything squirrely. I mean, for 240 bucks for a set, they seem like a good tire. So Cycle Gear still sells them. I was impressed with them. I don't know that they're any better than the Pilot Power, the Pilot Road 5s. The Pilot Road 5s are certainly going to last a hell of a lot longer than these, but I just got done with a track day and only wanted to spend a few bucks on just get a new set of tires, and so I threw those on, and so far they've been really good. So we'll cut over to the riding video. You can just kind of see it in action, see how it pulls off the turns and stuff. But the point of my rambling earlier and talking about my poll and demographics was, when you look on the forums, you're going to get advice, and most of the advice is coming from the perspective of new riders, which this may be the fastest bike they've ever ridden. And so to them, it's like, oh, I need, this is too much. The throttle's so touchy and sensitive. Yeah, it's a 948cc, motor. It's designed for torque. But if you're a person that's used to R1s and Tuonos and Panigales and Busas and stuff, you're going to get on this and go, it's not that much. It's fun. It's certainly quick, but it ain't all that. So if you want to keep that little bit of raw, a little bit of bad boy, which that bike is supposed to be, then consider going up a tooth or 2 in the back, maybe 3. Stock is 15 in the front. Go up a couple teeth in the back and see how you like it. Anyway, here's some riding.